Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Vishal Dahiya, and this week we will discuss the Wassenaar arrangement and its implications and significance for India since India has become its 42nd member. In a significant victory for its non-proliferation track record, India last week gained entry in the elite export control regime, the Wassenaar arrangement, becoming its 42nd member. The Wassenaar arrangement came in being in 1996, replacing the Cold War era Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Control or COCOM. It plays a significant role in promoting transparency and greater responsibility in transfer of conventional arms and dual-use goods and technologies. India's entry into this regime is expected to enhance its non-proliferation credentials despite not being a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that is NPT. India will also gain access to high technology, which will help address the demands of its defense and space sectors. Membership of Wassenaar arrangement is also expected to build up a strong case for India's entry into the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NSG, a 48-member group which controls the export of nuclear materials, equipment and technology. For a detailed discussion on what are the implications of India becoming a member of this arrangement, which is an export control regime, and the significance out here, we have with us a distinguished panel of guests in the studio. Let me introduce you them, starting with Mr. Sheel Sharma, former ambassador to Vienna. We also have with us Mr. Rakesh Sood, who has been a former special envoy to the Prime Minister on the issues of disarmament and non-proliferation. We have with us Mr. Abhijit Mitra also, who is an expert on defense economies, technology and procurement. Let me begin with you, Mr. Sharma, straight away, since you were India's representative in Vienna, where this Wassenaar arrangement is based, and the entire operation on this is carried from there, and you've been involved with this particular issue as well earlier. What exactly is Wassenaar arrangement for our viewers, if you could explain? It's one of those export control regimes, but what is its importance in terms of it being there?
You know, Wassenaar is a place in Holland, in Netherlands, and this arrangement was worked out in the mid-90s. This was at the end of the Cold War. And before during the Cold War, as you mentioned, this COCOM was the organization which used to, it was, during the Cold War, the purpose was to control technology so that it doesn't fall into the hands of the adversary. But after the end of the Cold War, the whole thing changed. And then they felt that dual-use technologies and munitions for defense particularly do not go into irresponsible hands. And so they could coordinate their export policies. So it was a voluntary coming together of a group of countries who were members of COCOM earlier. And they met in Wassenaar and worked out. So there are category lists and there is a munitions list. And the categories have 8 or 9 categories of, all those dual-use technologies which have bearing on defense. You have things like space and avionics and marine technology. Then you have microbiology. You have.
So the idea was to have a structure in place where you can stop or rather restrict the movement of technologies which might not be conducive for for a particular country or for a particular regime. Let me bring in Ambassador Sood on this. Ambassador Sood, Wassenaar arrangement, as Ambassador Sharma, broadly explained as to what it means and what exactly it is. But one pertinent question which is asked time and again is that there are a number of export control regimes. Some say 4, some say 3. We have Wassenaar arrangement, we have Australia Group, we have NPT, we have NSG. So what is the need and what is the significance of all these?
Well, these arrangements, except for the Wassenaar arrangement, which came into being after the Cold War, the other 3, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the Australia Group, and the Missile Technology Control Regime, basically originated during the Cold War. The Nuclear Suppliers Group deals with nuclear materials and technologies. The Missile Technology Control Regime deals with missile-related equipment and technologies. The Australia Group deals with biological and chemical organisms, materials, equipment and technologies. Now, Wassenaar originally, its predecessor, as you mentioned, was COCOM. The target of COCOM was the former Soviet Union and its allies. So the Western countries, led by the United States, wanted to restrict any sensitive technologies going towards Soviet Union. Now, with the end of the Cold War, Soviet Union broke up and threat perceptions underwent a fundamental change. Post 1990, the threat of proliferation of sensitive materials and technologies was seen as the major threat. And so therefore, COCOM was reinvented in a new avatar, in a new reincarnation as it were, as the Wassenaar arrangement. And this time actually Russia and many of the former Russian allies, East European countries, are also members of Wassenaar. These are countries who have both the capability of producing weapon systems, which would mean anything from small and light weapons to aircraft and tanks and so on, as well as they have the capacity of dual-use technologies, capabilities in the area of computers, information technology, information security, sensors, avionics, marine craft, and other specialized materials, material processing capabilities. And the Wassenaar arrangement controls exports of both munitions as well as dual-use technology.
Dual-use technology. Let me bring in Abhijit on this. Abhijit, both ambassadors have explained in detail what exactly is Wassenaar arrangement. The question to you is that India becoming a member, 42nd member of the Wassenaar arrangement, one of those four export control regimes, how significant it is for India?
Well, very significant, because if you realize that most of our indigenous defense technology organizations like the DRDO and ISRO came about because of technology denial. DRDO especially deals with the kind of equipment that was banned to us during the Cold War, which is now opened up to us. Now, this doesn't mean that it wasn't a ban really, it's more of a notification list, and it wasn't always followed in practice. So for example, in the 80s, Japan, even though Russia was, the USSR in those days was excluded from the list, they sold milling technology, metal milling technology to the USSR, which within 2 years became a submarine revolution in the USSR. They were able to produce submarines which were much quieter, that took NATO about 6-7 years to actually start detecting them all over again. For us specifically, what it means is it formalizes our reintegration, if you want to call that, into the global system.
Okay.
But it also recognizes that we have certain technologies that people would like to prevent us from giving to other people. It sort of brings you within the legal system, gives you a seat on the table, imposes a notification mechanism on you. And the belief is that it brings both responsibilities and rights in its wake.
Okay, Abhijit, you're saying that it gives us a seat on the table and it does bring responsibility along with that. But staying with the technology point, I'd like to bring in Mr. Sharma here. You know, this is a statement which has been made by the External Affairs Ministry also after the inclusion of India in Wassenaar arrangement was formally announced, that this is going to give impetus to the technology which we require in defense and space sectors. To what extent do you believe, Mr. Sharma, that this is going to help us in those particular sectors, defense and space specifically?
You know, these dual-use technologies are very widespread today. Globalization has brought about a real spread of these technologies, and most of the countries who are members of the COCOM or of the Wassenaar arrangement are those who have capacities in these technologies, and India joining them implies that they acknowledge India also has capacities. Now, this is not a treaty, so there is nothing obligatory, it's all voluntary.
It's all voluntary, its name itself is arrangement.
Yes, and when they do, so when you meet there is exchanging of notes, they get to know each other, and the very admission of India is a significant expression of the measure of confidence that they have in India. It is, so it's like turning off a page. In the past, when they had COCOM and they were working against the Soviet Union, somehow or the other, India was also treated in that category, and dual-use technologies to India were also denied, as Abhijit mentioned. But today, it's a very different situation. And India today, like NSG has given exemptions, we are members of MTCR. This is the third export control regime where India is now a member. It shows the acceptance of India. And there, though it is not mentioned, and normally they say that even for the members of the group, it is not a guarantee that they will get technology. But it is very, such a statement is very shallow. In reality, what happens is that they exchange notes. And if a country denies export to a particular recipient, the others are also supposed to respect that. So there's no undercutting. There's a kind of informal arrangement of not undercutting. Now this automatically brings you together in the group. So it's like a club. The other thing which I want to mention is that our export controls, which we have been putting in place from the 90s onwards, and these export controls today have become harmonized with all the export control regimes. So this is an admission of that. Last point I want to mention is that today non-proliferation agreements and disarmament agreements are not possible to work out. Their verification is almost infinitely difficult. So the only way, or the only game in town, is export controls. So for India, it is important to be associated with these export control regimes.
Okay, let me bring in Ambassador Sood on the last point which you made on the non-proliferation thing, since you were a special envoy to Prime Minister on these particular issues. And it is also being said that India's entry into Wassenaar arrangement, this export control regime, is also seen as the kind of confidence which other countries or other technologically developed countries have put in place in India's capability as a responsible nuclear power, or as a responsible country in the non-proliferation regime. So is that a significant boost to India's image?
Well, it certainly is, and I think it is important that we must understand how India's position has also evolved over the years. Because initially, with the nuclear suppliers group as well as with the missile technology control regime, India was seen as a target of these regimes. In fact, ISRO had sanctions imposed on it when we were acquiring the cryogenic engine technology from Glavkosmos in Soviet Union. Our nuclear program was targeted and hampered. Cooperation was denied to us on our nuclear program by the nuclear suppliers group. However, after 1998, after the nuclear tests of 1998, and taking into account the changes in the world around us, there was a shift in India's position, and we wanted to demonstrate that we were we wanted to demonstrate that we should be seen and accepted as a responsible nuclear weapon state. And therefore, we started to bring about changes in our export control regimes. Sometime after the waiver in 2008, the nuclear waiver, special waiver that was granted to us in 2008 by the nuclear suppliers group, a decision was taken that we would now seek full membership of all 4 export control regimes. And in 2016, we became members of the Missile Technology Control Regime, the MTCR, and now we have become members of the Wassenaar arrangement. So in that sense, this is part of a process that was put into operation nearly a decade ago.
So we are inching ahead one by one towards building that image that we are a responsible country.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it is quite clear that we were, on the nuclear suppliers group, there was obviously an error in terms of political judgment, and we went in for it not fully realizing how the lie of the ground was, and therefore we didn't succeed in that.
But
this was done quietly and successfully.
We will come back to the NSG part of it, and we'll have more questions on that. Let me bring in Abhijit on this. Abhijit, do you agree with what Ambassador Sood is pointing out, that this is a part of the process? We have become, in the last 2 years, we have gained entry into 2 export control regimes. There are 2 more left, and we are moving step by step. We are building an image for ourselves that we are a responsible nuclear power.
Right. I'd actually like to reinforce what both Ambassador Sheel Sharma and Ambassador Rakesh Sood said. First, it's part of a process. We've gotten into 2. I suspect the Australia group is going to be relatively easy to get into.
Okay.
The NSG,
that would make us 3.
That would make us 3. And unfortunately, and this is where I may disagree with both the ambassadors, is that NSG I don't see us getting into in the medium to long term. Where I'd like to reinforce what they both said is that there are certain tangibles that it brings to the table. If you remember, till about 2-3 years back, there used to be a big discussion in European parliaments, especially the Irish parliament and especially the Austrian parliament, about even sending trucks to India, military trucks to India, because apparently they were used in Kashmir and there was the whole human rights angle out there. That isn't going to happen anymore, because once you join this regime, it softens it. It isn't not that those discussions aren't going to happen, or that Austria is going to be very happy selling us things, because we still are under certain EU sanctions. But it certainly eases things. Think of it as a police certificate before you let your rental house to somebody. Okay. You're not very sure that the gentleman is absolutely legitimate, but the point is you've covered your legal base. Okay. What this agreement tangibly does for us is on 2 fronts. One is the intelligence front, and the second is the capacity building front. A few years back, for example, Brazil sold Pakistan certain anti-radar missiles, and we didn't know about it till we heard about it from the newspapers. And because part of the Wassenaar agreement is that you share data, the reporting process itself, you get to know certain things.
So we will have advanced information as to what is happening.
Exactly.
With respect to our neighbors.
It prevents nasty surprises from cropping up. That's one. The second is that there's a certain obligation here when you have export controls in place, which is you capacity build your own export, your customs guys. You have to give them technical training every year on identifying and being able to prevent exports of certain material. And there has to be certain institutional checks and balances, which then helps a lot in the kind of confidence building that the West is gaining with us.
Okay. These are very significant points. Let me bring in Ambassador Sharma on the moot question, the membership to NSG, which Ambassador Sood pointed out, even Abhijit spoke about it. Mr. Sharma, it's being said that this is going to take us one step closer towards, our quest for becoming a member of the elite coveted nuclear suppliers group. How much support will our quest get by becoming a member of the Wassenaar arrangement?
The core of these export control regimes is still nuclear. And when after, as Ambassador Sood was pointing out, after the 98 tests, when we went about explaining our position and trying to work out with the world to show how responsible we were, many of them used to recall our record of the previous decades, when we used to say nyat or no for many of these things. And at that time we were saying no because they were not actually effective. Even today we admit that these non-proliferation regime, these export controls are not going to block everything. But our joining them today is to show that we realize that their limitations, but we also realize where they are useful. Okay. So this kind of an approach is instilling confidence in our interlocutors. And these are the main countries in Europe and the former Soviet Union, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and those who had doubts about us.
So you're saying that this is one of those confidence building measures?
It is, and our, we have been in the past several years on a spree to explain this, the kind of workshop that we've held, the kind of outreach we are organizing. Like just last week, we had a India-US Business Council meeting where there was a presentation made on our export controls. Before that, over the course of this year itself, about 4 or 5 outreach conferences have been organized with our own industry representatives, with our other, so that the impression is very clear that it's a very coordinated, systematic approach that India is following. So this admission is actually a recognition of this very systematic export control system that India has put in place. And this goes a long way to support your credentials for NSG.
Okay.
Because the, you know, as Ambassador Sood mentioned, NSG actually was originally created as a, when we were the target.
We were the target.
But the 2008 exemption actually showed that target is no longer valid.
Yeah.
So now
the perception has undergone a lot of change. Let me bring in Ambassador Sood on this. Ambassador Sood, again, as you know, a significant question, because everything veers around towards our ultimate goal to becoming the member of the nuclear suppliers group. Very interesting, bit of information out here is that one country which opposes our entry into NSG is China. It says there is no consensus. There has to be a consensus. And interestingly, China is not a member of Wassenaar arrangement. So we will not have that opportunity to go ahead and deal with China on that particular platform. So how easy or difficult it is as of now? What's the realistic assessment you would make of this?
Well, I think that the NSG has become a distant goal, because I think China has taken a highly public stand on it, and a stand which is, despite the fact that there was a certain amount of high level political contact with China on this particular issue, China has not moved at all. We saw the Seoul plenary in 2016 and we saw the Bern plenary this year, and there has been no change in China's position so far. So China is doing this not so much in terms of non-proliferation objectives, but in terms of geopolitical objectives. The second thing is that China has said that the NSG membership criteria should be developed to cater not just for India, but for all non-NPT parties. Now, obviously, it is talking about Pakistan. However, Pakistan has such a terrible record in terms of having proliferated to so many countries that NSG members are not at all willing to bring in Pakistan. So therefore, the NSG road, till we can find a political resolution with China, remains a closed road. And it was therefore, in my view, it was unfortunate that we decided to go down the NSG path. We should have, as you rightly said, taken a step-by-step approach, sort of feeling our way through at each step, done MTCR, Wassenaar and so on, and only when we were certain that the political environment was conducive, moved forward on the NSG thing. So now we have, with the public positions taken, I think the NSG road will remain blocked for the foreseeable future.
Okay. Abhijit, you've already said that, you don't see this happening in the middle future or in the longer term as well. But why so? We are moving step by step. Next on the goal target might be the Australia group, and you yourself said that Australia group looks like an easy target for us to achieve. Yeah. So step by step moving ahead, we are inching closer?
Not really, and I'll tell you why. Because the perception of conventional weapons transfer in a lot of European countries and countries like, say, Mexico, for example, which also opposes, in a sense, our entry into the NSG, is very different from their perception on nuclear issues. Nuclear becomes a completely different ballgame for these guys. And the main reason for that, if you look at it, is in a way we've actually rubbed them the wrong way. When we keep insisting that it's China that is the biggest bloc, they can't go back and tell their domestic constituencies, look, we extracted a pound of flesh from India, we've got certain promises from India. It sort of belittles them in their own constituencies. When I was in Mexico City and Vienna, I was getting this complaint a lot from Austrian politicians and Mexican politicians. It's also very dangerous for us to think that China is the only one blocking us per se, because there is a group of about, say, 10 to 14 countries to last count that have issues with this. And I'd like to refer to what Ambassador Sood said, which is there is also a conflict with China out here, that these guys don't want Pakistan in, but there's also a level of agreement with China here. That is, they want to make the price for India so high that Pakistan will think twice. Pakistan will voluntarily not want to join this agreement. And primarily that price that they're seeking to extract from us is the co-located reactors. So if you recollect the exemption that we got in 2008, that was two categories, two solid categories, the civil reactors and the military reactors. There was a third category there, the co-located reactors. Now, in a sense, there's this sort of disappointment in these 10 to 14 countries, depending on how you count, that the co-located reactors form the bulk of the agreement. They wanted them to be separated very clearly into civilian and military. That hasn't happened. And where they really want to extract the price from us is in that co-location. Now, the problem is that co-location, it's not a Lego, you know, a reactor is not a Lego block. You can't just build it here and then remove it and say, well, this is now a civilian reactor. There's the whole cost of relocation, which would be ridiculous. It's something like 30 to 40 billion dollars at least, which we really can't afford.
Okay. So, it looks like, you know, both Ambassador Sood and Abhijit are pointing to the fact that it might not be easy. Closing comments from you, Ambassador Sharma. What's the way out here? Are we moving on the right path to achieving that target of becoming a member of the NSG? And Wassenaar arrangement is just one of the steps which we have achieved?
Yes, and I don't disagree with Ambassador Sood or with Abhijit. My point is that to the vast majority of the members of the NSG, if we keep going to them asking for this, they like it.
Okay.
Because, you know, the big India is coming, because there is also this India's stature which is growing.
Gives them some sort of satisfaction diplomatically.
And there is a certain acceptability of India. You see, if you look at globally today, India is generally more acceptable. I mean, I'm bringing something which is outside this domain, but for instance, this ICJ election, for instance, the kind of overwhelming support that we got, that showed that countries now realize that India doesn't mean harm to anyone. It is a kind of factor of stability. And when we go to every one of them saying, look, we would like it, and we would like to assuage your concerns. So it is a softener. And if you say, no, we don't want come, it is not good.
So basically things have started changing, but it will take time for them to be molded the way we want it to be. Becoming a member of the Wassenaar arrangement, which is one of the 4 export control regime, is a big step forward for India in its quest for formal acceptance as a responsible nuclear power. Last year, India had become a member of another such body, MTCR. And now that more and more countries are signing on to India's steadily strengthening credentials in the nuclear area, there is hope that a fresh momentum will be imparted to India's bid for the membership of NSG, that's the Nuclear Suppliers Group. We'll come back again next week with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.